it's amazed me every time I think about it to think that we can still load the first website in any of our browser without any challenge. I mean, think about it, how many of your digital assets have lived for 30 years without breaking? There aren't so many.
Hi, my name is Sophia Moshasha, and I'm here today with Dominque Hazaël-Massieux. He's an immersive web strategist at the W3C and plays a key role in defining what the future of the immersive web will look like. Welcome, Dominque.
Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. So you have a pretty impressive, extensive background in this industry and beyond. Tell us more about that background leading up to the WebXR initiatives that you're working on today.
Yeah, so I've been with W3C, this organization that creates standard for the web for 20 years now, and I've played various roles in there, but in general, my focus has been to help technical standards to emerge to satisfy new needs that we see rising from new usage of the web. And I've been involved in work, for instance, around WebRTC, the very technology we are using today to record this interview, which enable audio-video communication on the web. I've been involved more recently with machine learning. But some 6 years ago, when we started a lot of innovation happening around virtual reality, more specifically, I raised the question in the W3C community about what does it mean for the web? What does it mean to bring this new set of interactions, this new set of capabilities that virtual reality was bringing to the fore? What does that look in the web context? What's the intersection there? And in fact, there was already some work happening in the broader W3C community. A piece of work called WebVR had already emerged at that time. And so I worked with that community, with other communities. There had been efforts around bringing VR to the web, actually, before I was in W3C, so more than 20 years ago, with a project called VRML. So there was already quite a bit of precedent. And so I took all of that. I tried to reach out to these communities, to people that had thought about what the intersection between web and VR back then, and more today, web and XR, more generally speaking, would look like. And that culminated to an event at the end of 2016, where we brought more than 100 people together from all over the world, many different industries, companies, organizations, to actually map out what we think this intersection of the web and XR should look like. And that's where this notion of the immersive web, a web that gets out of the 2D screens that we've been used to, but instead embrace the richness of a 3D environment. That's where that vision, I guess, got anchored, and over the years, emerged into a concrete standardization program, which is what's happening today as part of the Immersive Web Working Group, in particular, our work around the WebXR device API, which basically makes it possible to run XR experiences from within a web browser.
So Dom, what is so promising about WebXR that made you devote your entire career towards growing this medium in particular?
Well, I think, I've been involved in W3C for 20 years, and W3C's mission is focused on the web. I find the web an extremely exciting and promising platform. And in 2015, 2016, when we saw the new generation of VR systems emerge, I thought that was too a very exciting and promising platform. And when I looked at the two ecosystems, they were very complementary. VR is extremely immersive. You're deep into the interactions. It's something you spend a lot of time and focus on. And if you compare to the web back then was, a lot more light touch in terms of interactions. It was always mediated either through a touch screen or through a mouse, 2D screen. So the immersive aspect was completely missing from it. But conversely, if you looked at the web, it's pure magic. Like, none of us can remember what the life before the web was. You have access to any information just at the tap of your finger or the click of a mouse. You have the capabilities for anyone on the planet to, start up a server, bring their content there, share their ideas, share their vision of their world or the world. And that's very different for VR. VR back then, at least, was like a really challenging space to get into. You had to find your way through so many SDKs. You had to get your content shipped into a specific store. And the barrier to entry was phenomenal. And at the end of the day, it also meant the number of users your content you could reach with through VR was really small, because you could only target this or that device, and only a subset of the users of that device would get your content. And so if you look at these two extremely rich ecosystems with having complementary needs, I thought, if we can combine both of their strengths, we get into a system that is super rich and immersive and super interactive, with a system that makes it accessible in one click, that anyone can contribute to without getting permissions from anyone else, and that can reach, there are 4 billion users of the web today. So it's a huge market for deploying your content, rather than the still smaller content that of people that have a VR headset or an augmented reality setup. So that's really the combination of strengths from these two ecosystems that I thought was really promising, also very challenging. And I think there are still challenges we are facing in combining the two. But I still feel that once we get the right set of features together, we really build an ecosystem that is much stronger than the two separate ecosystems.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on the exciting promises that WebXR can bring us now and in the future. And so we're all here because we want to see the WebXR device API become a standard. So tell us more about what the W3C is doing in their strategy and how they're tracking process for specifications. How are you guys evaluating what needs to be done, gathering input and feedback from the community, and planning for the deployment of 3D and immersive enablement of the web?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The core of the mission of the W3C is, our mission is lead the web to its full potential, which is very hand-wavy. What it means in practice is that the W3C community sees the web as the best open platform out there for our digital connected society. You need to have a platform where anyone can bring their ideas, their content, their services without getting permission from anyone else. And that's what the web is. It's a unique platform today where you have this room for innovation, for permissionless innovation. So that's a broad vision. But concretely, what WCC does to accomplish that vision is to create an infrastructure for this shared numeric digital platform. And how we build that infrastructure is through standards. Standards basically represent the set of features that the community agrees are the basic bricks that are needed to build a specific type of service, application, content that people want to bring to the web. And when you bring that to the immersive web space, the basic bricks that we've identified is this WebXR core device API, which basically brings the most basic set of features that are needed to enable VR and AR across a very wide variety of devices and platforms. And so what we do in WCC to bring this set of goals, of nice ideas from which WebXR started, into an actual standard that the world can build an infrastructure upon, is first ensuring this is the right set of ideas, and in particular, ensuring that it meets the needs of developers, of the industry. So it's a lot about reaching out to developers, to business that are using the standards to make sure they get the features they need. Making sure that we have implementers that are willing to actually ship the APIs. So in this case, we want to have browsers that ship the WebXR device API on as many XR-enabled devices as possible, so that developers can actually ship and deploy their content on as many devices as the web supports. And we also want to ensure that some of the core values that make the web this unique platform I was describing remain true also in the context of the immersive web of WebXR. Some of these values, for instance, are to ensure that if you're using a web-based application, in our case, a WebXR-based application, it won't invade your privacy. It won't divulge information about who you are and the kind of websites you visit, the kind of person you are. We want to keep that promise of safety when visiting a web resource. We want to make sure that what we do work for as many people as possible, and that means both taking into account the challenges that someone with a disability might have when using an XR system, and that's a very difficult but also rich space of investigation, but also making sure the technologies we develop don't work just for people in Western countries or people that speak English, but really work in as many cultural languages, countries as possible. So the role of our standardization process is getting these three high-level type of constraints, getting the right set of features for developers, getting something that implementers can ship, and making sure the values on which the web remains this universal platform for digital content. That's what gets a bunch of nice ideas into an actually usable standard, which we call a recommendation, because then we feel that this is something we can recommend to the world as the right approach to do the immersive web.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, all of the things that you mentioned are very important because this is a global platform, as you mentioned, and specifically for enterprises that are looking to deploy solutions on the immersive web. I mean, all of those things, all of those features definitely need to come to fruition for that for them to be able to effectively utilize this medium for the ways that they need to for their businesses. So on that note, what kind of testing and socialization is the W3C doing with businesses and end users to gather their feedback? We talk about the developer community all the time, but end users and businesses are a big part of this. And then following on to that, what was some of the most valuable feedback you've received from those businesses and end users?
So the way WCC standardization work, we go through several phases where we reach out to as many of these communities as possible to get their input and their feedback. And I'll describe a few of them. So I described earlier how a lot of this work started in an event I organized in 2016, and we've run several of these events around the immersive web, where the idea is not just to get people that are already in the WCC community, but also people that have not been so far involved, so that they get involved in that conversation. They bring their ideas, their questions, their feature requests, they share their sense of prioritization. So that's one way we do that outreach. Before doing any kind of formal standardization work, we have a very strong pre-standardization program, which we call the WCC community group. And in particular, we have a WCC Immersive Web Community Group, where again, anyone can join. So anyone who believes in the immersive web vision of using the web as a platform for XR content, anyone can join, can bring, again, their ideas, question, request, share a sense of where the community as a whole is heading. And this is an extremely active community group we have in the WCC, and where we hear from developers, but also end users, business people, about what they see as emerging from the market. And the final part of our process, which is the actual formal standardization process, which follows a set of, I guess, more formal rules in terms of how the work happens. That work is also open to anyone. You have to be a WCC member, which I guess is a bit more of an investment than just joining the community group. But beyond that, this is really something where if you believe in the vision, if you have needs, if you have a set of priorities that you think the immersive web need to tackle, well, that's where you can get your voice heard. That's where you can be part of the conversation with the folks that are actually implementing WebXR, the browser vendors, hardware manufacturers. You can be at the same table as they are to, give your sense of the market, the sense of what your customers needs for your specific use case or the set of use cases you're trying to optimize for.
So shifting gears a little bit to talk about all of our favorite term for the summer, the metaverse. This term has been around for a long time, but this summer there was a big boom in the discussion about what it actually is and means. What does the term metaverse mean to you, and how would you define it for the community?
So the metaverse is interesting as a term because it has a bit of a dystopian aspect as well, where people can get lost in the metaverse. But in general, the vision of having a virtual space from which you can navigate to one universe to another seamlessly, I think that's very closely aligned to where we want to go with the immersive web. And again, with that notion of permissionless innovation, where anyone can bring who they are to the platform. It's anyone can bring their own universe. That's how it is a metaverse rather than a single universe. So that vision of the plurality of perspectives, of ideas that the metaverse carries, I think that's very much something I'm interested in. And from a standardization perspective, it's a fascinating challenge. There are challenges in getting the kind of interoperability across all of these universe and systems that you would want. There are very strong challenges around how do you make it work in a way that is safe for the end users, because we all have our perspectives, but not all perspectives are safe for anyone to use. So there is a need to make sure the end user remains always in control, which is a key principle behind the way we design our technologies for the web. So as a long-term vision, I think it's a very inspiring direction. There are very concrete, smaller scopes issues around management, for instance, of your avatar across these different universes that are also really rich in possibilities. So yeah, I'm very interested in where this is going. I think it's an interesting direction.
I think we all are, and you touched on interoperability, and that is, I think, one of the key features for the definition of what makes a metaverse, right? And there's a strong movement towards this. And in fact, there's a group called OMI, the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group, which is working with the W3C on these initiatives. Neil Trevitt said it will take a constellation of standards to achieve metaverse interoperability. And can you speak to what it will take for the W3C and other standards organizations to help accelerate that path to the open metaverse?
Yeah, so the OMI work is happening as part of one of these WCC community groups that I was alluding to, which again allows anyone on the planet to come with their ideas, build their community, and prepare it for standardization. So in the context of the specific work that would need to happen in the WCC around the metaverse, my sense is that the first thing that needs to happen is a landscape of the problem space, because it is very large. There are very many issues of interoperability that needs to be solved, and not all of them can be solved at the same time. Not all of them need to be solved at the same level. In some cases, you can solve it by facilitating, I guess, inter-services operability rather than, for instance, browser-level interoperability, which is where WCC in general would operate. In some cases, you have really interesting questions, as I mentioned, for instance, around avatar. How do you want to represent yourself? Is it a single identity across all the spaces of the metaverse? How do you switch from one to another? How can you trust that the avatar you're talking with is the avatar you think you're talking with? So yeah, the space of challenges is huge, and so for that community, my suggestion would be to identify maybe some of the low-hanging fruit that can then help bring a lot more resources and investment into the broader set of challenges that this vision requires.
So let's switch it back over to businesses, because this is what the focus of this particular summit is on. Why should businesses care about standardizations for this technology?
Yeah, so sometimes it's hard for people to realize both the value and standards and the reasons to get involved. At the end of the day, to move away from the digital landscape, nobody asks, why does it matter that we have roads? Or why does it matter that we can ship stuff from one place in the planet to the other without having to design a new boat and a new container every time? And that's the value of standards. You know that once you have a standard, something that you have designed to work with that standard will work as expected, where you expect it, as many times as you need to expect. So the value of the standard is really to encode in the infrastructure a set of needs that have been recognized as universal or near universal. So for business, is you build against it, you can ship it, and you don't have to think to the 20 versions of that particular headset, or the fact that the user might be using at this time a mobile phone or a desktop computer or a wireless headset. All of that is embodied in the standard. You have to build against the standard. You have to take into account the questions that the standard embodies, but you don't have to redesign each time you build a new experience, the whole stack that goes below it. So that's, I think, why business care about standards. What's often happens is that business don't realize that they get a lot more value out of the standards if they actually help design them. It's not just that standards happen and you build against them. You can, and my argument would be you should, as a business, get directly involved in the definition of the standard, because that is what you're going to build against. That is what is defining the type of service, application, content you'll be able to give to your customers. So it is trusting a lot the people that are around the table about your business if you're letting them make these decisions without you being at the table about what your customers need, your users need. So that if there is one message that I hope people would remember from this discussion, is that if you care about what the immersive web will be, what XR on the web will be, you should really think about getting involved, not just waiting for the standardization to be done. but being part of the discussion, being part of the conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's to summarize, it's the invisible like infrastructure that nobody sees behind the curtains, right? But it eliminates the cost, the need for rework. You know exactly what you're getting every time, and you know it's going to work, and therefore it validates the investment that we're all going to make towards this, on both from the enterprise side as well as the consumer side. You know, getting this hardware for ourselves. So yeah, so in your opinion, then, what will it take to get enterprises to adopt this technology and realize the value of what it can do for their businesses? Like, what's the kind of that first step towards that mass adoption?
So there are several patterns that we've seen emerge in terms of mass adoption. In some cases, it's a so-called killer app. You find the perfect intersection of XR and the web, and it takes the world by fire, and then everything moves in that direction. Sometimes it's circumstances. I mentioned earlier that I've been involved in our work on real-time communication in the web, and that work was always important, had seen already a lot of use and adoption. But with the pandemic, adoption has gone through the roof. The new usage we are seeing emerge in terms of what's needed on the web are multiplying every week or so. And when I look at the world as it is today, first, the notion that we can't be together. We're having these interviews several thousands of kilometers at a distance, and your event will be a virtual event. Well, this is great that we can do this, and I'm proud that the technology that I've built help enable this, but it's still not the same kind of connection you get from a more embodied experience. And to me, this metaverse, this immersive web, XR in general, is a way to get us there. We're not there yet, but I think we need to get there. And not just because of the pandemic. I think the pandemic is a big sword above our head at the moment, but I think we're all aware that the world is not going to be the same after the pandemic, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of the climate crisis, where travel will maybe become the exception rather than the rule. And we've learned so much from meeting people physically. If we can get even just a subset of that by enabling more immersive, distant communication, I think we would do the world a big service. And so that's the kind of trigger that I think could happen for the immersive web vision, because again, the web has this unique set of capabilities of enabling anyone to connect with anyone. And that's something really hard to replicate as well.
Yeah, and although we are video streaming this, I will point out that we are having watch parties in several metaverses. And during the polys, we actually restreamed the video feed from those metaverses back into the video conferencing platform that was streaming within those metaverses. So we're doing what we can to kind of create that seamless flow of real life to virtual, and kind of have that feedback loop there. But I can't wait till we can actually all meet in WebXR for an event like this eventually. Okay, so what could hold up adoption of WebXR as a standard, and what could be done to help remove those roadblocks?
Yeah, so it's a multifaceted question. So as I described earlier, in our standardization process, there are really three legs that we need to satisfy. Are we satisfying the right use cases? Have we defined the specifications that implementers are ready to ship? And do we satisfy the other set of values that make the web this universal, successful platform? In terms of developers, meeting the needs of developers and business, I think WebXR Core is a small set of features, but an already very generative set of features. So on that leg, I think we are in a pretty good shape, and we already have a lot of additional work coming through the pipes that completes that basis. So for that leg of the work, I think we are in pretty good shape. Then it remains to demonstrate that implementers are ready to ship that set of features, and we are getting there. I mean, we're getting pretty good adoption from a different set of vendors. Of course, there are more vendors we would like to see adoption from, but that's something that I don't think should hold up the final progress of the specification. And the third bit is, again, ensuring all the values we want to bring with the web in WebXR are satisfied. So we are working out, for instance, a clearer understanding of whether WebXR has the right starting point to enable accessible experiences of WebXR in web browsers. So that's one of the things we are working on at the moment. And there are always interesting challenges in the space of privacy, because we are dealing with a space that is extremely rich when you're in an immersive space. There are so many things that can be detected about you, the type of movement you make with your hands, the type of movement you make with your head. And a lot of that can actually serve to identify you, categorize you. So there are mitigations that we know how to bring to these questions, but it is a non-insignificant challenge. So that's probably where some of the remaining efforts will need to be put before we finalize the standard. But just to be extremely clear, that's what's needed before we call it a standard. It's not what's needed before you can actually start using most of it. So the way standardization happens in W3C, it's not going from a start point to an end point in a waterfall type of development methodology. It's a very iterative process. So we need to get to a certain level of stability before we can say, tell developers start using it. But developers have already started adopting WebXR, and developers should continue adopt WebXR well before we finalize the standard. The standard is the recognition that we've done all the things we felt needed to be done for this first set of features. It's not a barrier to adopting this set of features before that.
Dom, the industry is watching Apple closely as a bellwether to mass consumer adoption. Once Apple rolls out support for the standard, which they've declared is in development and it has already been ported to WebKit, what will be the process for browser vendors to integrate new features?
So historically, some of the developers watching this will know that features, for instance, have appeared in browsers behind things like so-called vendor prefixes. You would have your CSS style sheet littered with various prefixes for various browsers. In general, the W3C community has largely moved away from that approach. And what we've seen browser vendors do to a pretty good level of success in terms of helping adoption is shipping their features either behind what is called a flag, so something you have to enable in the browser to make it work, so that as a developer you can test whether it matches what you need, or available in specific developer-targeted versions like Safari, Technical Preview, Chromium Canary, or Firefox Nightly. And I expect that for any browser that hasn't shipped it yet, that's the first strong signal we would get of a possible future deployment, seeing it shipped into these browser versions. And that would also give the opportunity for businesses to check whether they get what they need from the said browser.
Mm-hmm. So for businesses that aren't currently in this space but are curious and want to start creating and deploying content on the immersive web, how can they get involved? What are the first best steps for them to kind of get involved in creating content for their businesses on the web?
So, like, if you're testing the water, I think the best way to do this is using a framework, and possibly a high-level framework rather than a low-level one, where you can prototype your content, your service, your application very quickly. And that's, there again, a pretty unique advantage of the web, the kind of flexibility it gives you in terms of experimenting with the system. And the advantage of these frameworks is that they tend to hide a lot of the complexity that exists when you have to actually build and ship 3D immersive experiences. So that's probably the thing I would recommend. Like, find one of your developers that want to stretch their zone of comfort, get them to experiment with one of these high-level frameworks, and start thinking about what it means to create an immersive service. Like, we have 30 years of experience now behind our collective minds in building for these 2D environments, and we've already adapted to smaller screen and no keyboard, no mouse with the mobile revolution. But 3D, I think, is another level of change. It's not just that it's a smaller screen, it's a complete different dimension, with the notion of spatial movement, with the notion that you need to guide the user through a very well-known path. And so even before building a product, you need to understand the space of design constraints. And that's where I would really start, not necessarily with the product building necessarily, but first design thinking about what it means to change, to add this additional dimension to your service.
Yeah, absolutely. And so last question, when it comes to future proofing, what would you tell businesses to give them the confidence in investing in this medium today and not waiting, and that these immersive experience that they are investing in and building will last the same way as old websites have into the future?
Well, I think that's part of the promises of web standards. As you said, it's amazed me every time I think about it, to think that we can still load the first website in any of our browser without any challenge. I mean, think about it, how many of your digital assets have lived for 30 years without breaking? There aren't so many, and we are here talking about the bigger digital asset of all, like the billion of websites out there. And so the confidence that business can have is that part of the business we are in WCC is building to last. So once we start saying, this thing is ready to adopt, we're not going to break it unless we get very clear signals that it's not going to break someone's application. And again, it's not just words. We have facts to back this up. It's not that we never deprecate APIs, but we only do that with the utmost care if we have like a very high degree of confidence that nobody will suffer from it. So the reason standardization takes time, and many of your watchers will feel that it takes time, but it's because we need to do it right, both in the sense that it has to satisfy what people want to do today, but also that it can evolve to satisfy what people will want to do tomorrow. And we can't read the future, but we have enough experience in knowing what kind of evolutions will need to be accommodated, that we feel pretty confident we can incorporate that in our technical development. So that's basically the promise we're trying to build within our standards.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dom, for speaking with me today. Really appreciate your insights and what you're doing to really enhance and grow the vision for the immersive web. I know conversations like this are super important, not only for the developer community, but for the businesses that are looking to create and deploy content on the web, because that really is going to kind of instigate mass adoption. It's kind of what we need. We need the businesses on board. So what you're doing is super important for the community, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me today.